Okay, everyone, this video is going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge. There's going to be some time traveling involved with the editing, but I think we're going to get through this okay. It's going to be kind of massive. Wrapping up my Starrcade best and worst matches video, which I've decided to attach that footage to this video. So we're going to be going back into the past to when I filmed a few days ago to get the Starrcade matches up, and we're going to attach it to this. And as of right now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about NXT War Games in this portion. Then the next portion, I'm going to talk about the episode of Impact that I'm going to watch with Kenny Omega on it, which is really interesting and really exciting. I want to see what they do with that and where that ultimately goes and what it sets up. And then you'll get the Starrcade matches video as part of that. So this is probably going to wind up being a crazy thing. Probably going to wind up being a little messy and all over the place. I don't know. We'll see how it all goes. But I'm going to be doing a lot of combining and fancy editing. And like I said, it's going to look like I'm time traveling. So, but it should be a fun video regardless, because I'm excited to talk about all the topics I'm going to be talking about, except for NXT Takeover War Games. Oddly enough, a show that I watched on just last night. And I guess I should start off by saying I missed the opening video package and everything else because I was catching the end of the Giants-Seahawks game where the Giants got a W. All right, Giants are on a winning streak. Who would have thought? And it's cool to see. And the Washington football team won today, defeating the undefeated Pittsburgh Steelers. So it's like, wow, it's like a couple of teams from the NFC East are tired of being made fun of, I think. Philly's not. They're still a joke, but we'll see how Dallas does tomorrow. But it's like I don't mind the Giants and the team formerly known as the Redskins having a race to the finish to decide who the divisional champs are. I mean, this has been a rough season for all four teams in the division, and now it looks like the Giants and the Redskins are kind of finding a groove. I think we're playing really well on defense, and I'm really happy to see that. And Alex Smith's comeback story, I think, is great and fantastic. And I'm really happy for him. So for him to get a win like that today, I think is pretty cool, especially after the injury that he suffered way back when. And for him to be playing as well as he's playing now, I think is pretty remarkable. So if either one of those teams can win the division, I'm all for it. Again, anybody but Philly or Dallas. So, well, really, it's Dallas, absolutely not. Philly, then Washington, then Giants. Giants obviously would be my preference, but I'm excited that, you know, my two top teams in the division, the ones that my personal favorite team, the one that I root for, and the team that if they won I would be okay with it. I wouldn't throw a bitch fit. They seem to be finding their groove as we head into the final weeks of the season. So hopefully what I'm hoping for is that whoever wins this division does better than at least finishes with an 8-8 season, because it's been so bad all season. It's like, look, if the winning team can finish with 8-8, it won't look quite as bad. But I don't know. I have my doubts that we're going to get there. But then again, I didn't think the Giants were going to beat the Seahawks with Colt McCoy at quarterback either. So who knows? Who the hell knows? Steelers losing. That didn't. I wouldn't have expected Washington to be the team to beat them, but they were going to get beat at some point. I could just see it. It's like, this is an 11-0 team. I mean, they're not a bad team at all. They're not bad at all. Certainly playoff caliber, but last undefeated team in the league. And then you look at their schedule, I'm like, oh, that's why. It's like they haven't played anybody that's any good. So they were a team they were waiting to lose. And I think it's actually going to be good for them in the long run to suffer a loss and then kind of reevaluate themselves and kind of find their motivation again and not be so used to winning. I think this is going to be good for them in the long term. So we'll see how the Steelers do. So that's my football rant. But anyway, long walk for a short glass of water. But what I mean is I did not see the opening preview package for NXT Takeover War Games. I assumed I missed nothing. I flipped on the TV after the game was over and I saw Shotzi Blackheart come out on her tank and fire a missile or whatever the hell that was. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of neat and silly looking, but it's kind of neat, you know. War Games fits the theme of the show. And I'll give my overall impressions first. You know, a couple months ago, when I talked about All Out, I said that was the worst pay-per-view in AEW history, by far. By far the worst pay-per-view they've ever done. And, a large part of that is because of the Matt Hardy-Sammy Guevara situation, and it just felt like the show never really recovered from it, except for the main event, which was pretty good. But the show just hit like a wall, just a huge wall, and it was a hard hole for AEW to climb out of when that whole situation went down the way that it did. And I said it was their worst pay-per-view. And now here I am, I find myself talking about an NXT Takeover, and I'm like, yeah, that was the worst NXT Takeover. I would say it was the first Takeover I honestly didn't enjoy. And, props for consistency. They started doing these things in 2014. Over 6 years, close to 7 years of all these Takeover specials they've been doing. And I've enjoyed pretty much all of them up to this point. But we finally got that one where I was like, yeah, this one wasn't it. This one didn't do it for me. The effort was there from the talents involved. They did the best they could. I would even argue in some cases they worked a little too hard. But the show was overly long. The matches were overly long. There was not one match on this card that felt the appropriate length. Like they all, except for maybe the second match, they all dragged to some degree where it's like, this is going way longer than it has any business going. And by the time I got to the main event, the second War Games match, I was so like beaten down by the show, I felt, where it's this sensory overload. I got a phone call from a friend. I was like, you know what? I need a break from this show. I'm going to go talk to my friend. I was on the phone with him for 2 hours. And then I went back to the main event later, and it didn't really help. The break didn't really help. It was a show that tried to do way too much and didn't have the appropriate build-up to make a lot of the things that they tried really matter or work. And a lot of people have commented on how the build-up to the show was not as strong as it had been with other takeovers. And I think what we're seeing now are the residual effects of, COVID. I think COVID has negatively impacted every wrestling company to some degree. But also, the tendency of the NXT brand on USA to kind of hotshot matches, just hotshot things and hotshot big matches all the time, whereas AEW on Wednesday night shows a little bit more restraint and doesn't always do the big matches. I mean, Moxley, Omega beating Moxley for the title is one of the few title matches they've had, and the only title change for the world title that they've done on TV. Whereas NXT, I feel like the NXT title's on the line almost every other week, it seems. They've done it quite a bit in over a year of this whole Wednesday Night War thing. And one of the major appeals of NXT initially when they were on the network was that they weren't rushing. They would take their time, slowly build things, then you get to the takeover specials and it would be awesome. And now it's like they beat you over the head with it, with trying to put on pay-per-view quality shows every week, and you blow your load. And I think NXT's gotten to a point where they've just blown their load and they can't like amp up the excitement for TakeOver the same way they could. And here I think it all just kind of came to a head where it's like they tried to spruce it up with gimmicks and it was just too much. It was just too much. So anyway, I'll go into the specific matches. The opening War Games match with the women, Team Candice LeRae versus Team Shotzi Blackheart. I didn't care too much about this going in, and there were various parts of the match where I forgot who was on which team because it was just a car wreck with bodies flying all over the place. I think every single lady went under the ring to grab weapons, so it just kind of became like a almost like an Abyss match, almost like the old Abyss TNA matches where it was just grab the weapons, hit with the weapons, and it just kind of became a car wreck. And it had its moments, like Io Shirai diving off the cage with the trash can over her. It's like, wow, if Oscar the Grouch ever became a wrestler, I think I just found out what his finishing move would be. And there was that double Tower of Doom spot where you could hear them counting down to get the timing of the spot right. And a lot of the entire thing just felt like it was I almost felt like I was watching like a walkthrough of the match to make sure they had it down for the real show. It kind of had that feel to it, but it was a fun, action-packed, car-wrecky type of match. Not the type of thing that I get overly excited for, but at least I wasn't bored. It was just kind of a Michael Bay explosion fest. The wrestling edition is basically the best way to sum this up. A lot of people complain that Io Shirai took the pin. I actually a few weeks ago I forgot that Io Shirai was the champion. That's how little I'm invested in NXT these days. Where it's like the women used to be like the best part of the show, and now it's like everything else on NXT, they've just kind of blown their load. But a lot of people complain that Io Shirai ate the pin. At this point, I'm like, I don't care. They were just setting up another opponent for her. And except now, it's like, I don't even remember who got the pin. I think it was Raquel Gonzalez. I think she got the pin. I don't remember. So it tells you how much of an impression it left on me. So the biggest problem with this match is that it was such a car wreck that anything that comes after it is going to be kind of dull by comparison. That there's that death spot. And to me, like an opener, you want to start hot, but you don't want to peak in the first match either. And way too many shows in the modern era have done that, where the best match is the opening match, and everything else is just downhill from there. It's like an ideal opener to me is something like the Rockers versus Haku and the Barbarian at WrestleMania 7. Quick, fast-paced action. Everybody came out of it looking great. Not a whole lot of story going into the match. It was just a match to do to open up the crowd, open up the show and pop the crowd, get them excited, get the show off on a good foot, on the right foot. And that's what it was. It was perfectly effective in what it was trying to do and what it needed to accomplish. And it did that in spades. And you still had the much bigger matches down the road, like Savage and Warrior and Hogan and Slaughter and the blindfold match and the tag title match and the IC title match and various other things. So it didn't like overshadow all of that other stuff, but it still started the show on a really high note. So that was effective. Here it's like you got this like car wreck where they did everything to each other, and now the rest of the show just kind of has to kind of live up to it, and it's it gets everything off on a it puts everybody else that has to follow it in a bad position, I guess is where I'm going. And I guess that's the modern mindset of you got to go out there and try to have the best match on the card. I'm like, you don't. And that's the whole, I've talked about it before, the whole chasing star ratings thing. You don't need to work every match in a way to where you're trying to chase star ratings. You just got to deliver the story that you need to tell in that particular situation. And I'm going to talk about that with the other matches that come up, but and I've said it before. I said it last year, and I'll say it again. I've said it with Elimination Chamber. I've said it with TLC. I've said it with Hell in a Cell. I've said it with Lockdown. You don't need more than one of the same type of gimmick match on one show. It's asinine. I didn't like it when Crockett did it back in the day, where they'd have 2 cage matches on a show. I'm like, that's stupid. That's stupid. Why would you have a cage match right after Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard just had a bloodbath in the middle of the card? It makes no sense. It's just... like, whatever cage match you do after that is going to suck in comparison. And, yeah, that's just how it is. I don't like that format, and WWE has subscribed to it in recent years. It's like, we got to do 3 Hell in a Cells. I'm like, no, you don't. You want to do 2 War Games. I'm like, yeah, it's not a good idea. You got to do 2 Royal Rumbles. I'm like, not really. Not the best. I mean, do I really want to watch a show with 2 hour-long matches? Because that's what the Royal Rumble has become. Me personally, I'm just like, look, if they want to have the women in the Royal Rumble, just have the women do the Royal Rumble. Why not? Like, just do it. Just and trade off year after year or something like that. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure like the male roster would revolt if they did that, but it's like, I'd rather have that than just having 2 Rumbles on the show or 2 War Games matches or whatever. It's like, look, just which one deserves the War Games step? And this year, I would say the men did overall, and just let that be the War Games match, and figure out something else for the women. You don't need to have 2 War Games matches. And of course, the War Games brings other problems where, as I've said before, War Games to me is a match that needs color. It's a match that absolutely needs color, and modern WWE doesn't want to give color, so it's like, okay, then why are you doing War Games? It's just... it prevents it from living up to the potential of a match like that. And this match, the women's match was also weird because the faces had the person advantage. throughout the match, which is weird to see. And it's like a War Games match, it just doesn't work as well. It's like, we all make fun of it where the heels always have the advantage, but it's like, yeah, but if you do it with the faces having the advantage, it doesn't make any sense. And the entire match feels off. So which is why I've said before, War Games is not a match that's conducive to doing it annually. It's the type of match you do when you need it. Because if you do it annually, things start to become contrived and things start to become, repetitive and things like that. So to me, like, War Games works best when you save it for when you absolutely need it. And that's my take on the matter, and that's my take on the opening match to NXT Takeover War Games. So let's go into the second match. Tommaso Ciampa taking on Timothy Thatcher, a guy that I really liked from MLW. So to see him in NXT, I think it's a good pickup, and I think stylistically he's a good match for a lot of guys. I wish they had opened with this match, kind of going back to what I said earlier about, like, you don't need to start with, like, the hottest story or anything like that. Just start with a simple match to kind of pop everybody. And that's kind of what this was. Probably went a little too long, and having to follow the War Games match, I was already exhausted from that, like, 40-minute affair. And then coming into this one, I was already tired, so it was like I was only half paying attention for, like, the first half of it. But once they got going, then it became, like, really good with, like, the chain wrestling and the hard hits they were giving each other. Actually, I would argue that this match felt like more of a brutal fight than either of the two War Games matches, or the strap match, or the North American title match. This was the one match on the show that kind of felt like, wow, these guys are beating the shit out of each other, and it felt kind of a little bit more real than the other ones did. And overall, it was a solid effort. Again, I wish they had opened up with this match. It probably would have been, would have gotten me, probably would have gotten the show off on a better foot, I think, than just starting off with a War Games match and exploding in everybody's faces right away. But again, another match that probably went too long, but it was the match I enjoyed the most on the show. Now let's go into a match that I did not enjoy, the strap match between Dexter Lumis and Cameron Grimes. This was awful. Like, this was terrible. I would say probably worst match in NXT TakeOver history. It's the dullest and most uninterested I've ever been in an NXT TakeOver match. And it felt longer than the previous two matches. That thing, it took forever for this thing to end. I was shocked when I went online and I saw the match times. I was like, wait, this only went 12 minutes? It felt so much longer than that. And it was, I couldn't get a good sense of who the face and the heel were supposed to be. The feud itself was not that interesting. It was just a mess. The entire thing was a mess. And also, throwing in another stipulation, again, this is an old NWA Crockett thing where we got to have 19 gimmick matches on a show to sell all these brutal fights, which is completely unnecessary. We all talk about the reasons why WWF got the advantage over Crockett and WCW, going into the late 80s and early 90s and everything. And there are many reasons for that. One reason is, WWF, like, they didn't over-gimmick the holy hell out of all their matches. And it just, I don't know, maybe it was easier to digest. I'll say that. They didn't have 9 million title belts, and they didn't have 40 million gimmick matches on every single show. The simpler approach seemed to work better for WWF and had an easier time connecting with audiences. So, food for thought. But anyway, the strap match was awful. I was begging. It was one of those matches where I was just begging for it to stop. Just please end this match. And anytime somebody kicked out, I would groan. I was that uninterested in it. And not to call out a legend or anything like that. I noticed that Sean Waltman said something on Twitter where he said that this is probably the greatest strap match I've ever seen. Granted, there's not a lot of truly great strap matches. I don't mean to shit on Sean Waltman or anything, because obviously he knows a lot more than I do. I would like to offer a counterpoint and say the greatest strap match I've ever seen was Sting and Vader at Super Brawl 3. That thing was amazing. And if you have not seen that match, you are doing yourselves a disservice, because it's on the network, so go check it out. Super Brawl 3. Or was it 3? Super Brawl? Yeah, it was 3, because 2 was Luger and Sting. But totally worth checking out. Wonderful match. Great match. I would argue the best match that Sting and Vader had, which is saying a lot, because they had a lot of great matches. When you look at Starrcade 92, more on that later. Great American Bash 92, and that match they had, I think it was Slamboree 94, where they had that last main event. I believe it was their last match together. There was also that triangle match they did with the artist formerly known as the Big Boss Man, which that was also very good stuff. So Sting and Vader, all their matches are great. They're all worth checking out. But that strap match, totally worth it. And I would like to offer that as the greatest strap match of all time. Certainly not this. This was awful, and I was bored to tears. But then we got another match that left me baffled and confused. The North American triple threat match, the North American title triple threat match. Leon Ruff, who is, boy, does he live up to his name, because he's green and rough and not ready for a mid-card title spot. I feel like they did it just to surprise people, but man, he's not great. He's not great. He might be good, but he's unpolished. I'll say that. He's unpolished, and he's uninteresting at this point in time, and it feels like he was just thrown into shark-infested waters. And felt like a mistake to put the belt on him. But anyway, we got Leon Ruff defending against Damian Priest and Johnny Gargano. Again, it's another match that went way too long. It went way too long, and they did a bunch of stuff that made no sense and didn't matter. Perfect example. So Damian Priest, he does the Razor's Edge and throws Leon Ruff through the plexiglass wall, and he gets taken out of the match. I was like, okay, so I guess it's down to just Priest and Gargano. Then Leon Ruff comes back. And I'm thinking, okay, he's going to make this heroic comeback where he's selling. He's not selling. Doesn't really sell all that well. And it's like, all right, we're getting ready to wrap up this match. I think the match continued for like another 5 or 6 minutes after that. And maybe what they were trying to recreate was something akin to like WrestleMania 20, where Shawn and Triple H slam He Who Must Not Be Named through the announce table. And then Shawn gets in the ring with blood on his face and goes, now it's just you and me. It's you and me, Megatron. No, it's just me, Prime. Whatever. But I think they were trying to recreate that, and then Benoit makes his dive into the ring to break up the pinfall and save himself for the title. I think they were trying to recreate that, or something akin to that, but it just didn't work, and it just made the match drag out longer than it needed to. And the spot with Leon Ruff getting slammed through the plexiglass wall felt like it didn't matter by the time the match was over. You could have cut it out of the match and it wouldn't have impacted anything. It didn't matter in the building of the story at all. So it just felt like a random thing they did. And then I was getting flashbacks to bad WCW when I saw a bunch of Ghostface guys. I guess WWE felt that Retribution was such a hit they need to recreate it with goons in Halloween masks. But the Ghostface guys were trying to help Johnny Gargano win, and they did. They succeeded. And they were running in and out, and there were like a ton of them, and it just became like a convoluted 3-ring circus, and it became a mess. And then after the match, one of the Ghostface unmasked and revealed Austin Theory, and I was like, it was him the whole time. Why should I care? I don't care at all. It didn't feel like a big surprise. It didn't feel like a big payoff to anything. It was like, oh, there's Austin Theory. Okay. Like, it didn't land the way I think that they wanted it to land. And I think it's a case of where they tried to do too much, and the end result was something that was baffling and confusing and uninteresting rather than exciting, which is what they were going for, but it is what it is. And so, like I said, by this point in the show, I'm just dead tired, and I'm like, the show is just beating me into submission. Sensory overload in the first match, and then matches 3 and 4 were just awful. I thought, just didn't do it for me. So by the time we get to the main event, I was like, look, I need a break, so I'm calling my friend, and we're on the phone for 2 hours. So when I went back and finally watched the War Games match, I'd say it was generally made a little bit more sense than the women's match as far as how well constructed it was, but again, it went way too long, and I don't know why they feel the need to have these things go as long as they do, and the end result was a finish that was a little flat, that didn't make any sense for whatever story they were trying to tell. And I'll use Full Gear to make this example. One of my praises of Full Gear as a show, aside from the main event, I really like the finishes on this show. I like the kind of flash roll-up pin during Darby and Cody. I like that Omega just beat Hangman with the one-winged angel, and there was no Gaga other than that. He just beat him with his finisher. Novel concept. But the finish I liked the most was in the tag title match, where FTR and the Bucks are having this Styles clash where they reference the entire history of tag team wrestling along with it. And we get to that point where the Flips Not Fists guys, the Fists Not Flips guys decide to show off and try to outdo the Bucks, because this whole match they've been trying to outdo each other with their knowledge of tag team wrestling. And they finally decide we're going to do a flippy flop move to kind of put the Bucks in their place. And it cost him. He landed, no water in the pool, and then he gets hit with a super kick for the loss. And it was like, that is great, beautiful, wonderful, perfect finish for this match. How the characters were built up getting to this point, and the stylistic differences between the two guys. The ground and pound, classic old school guys try to flippy flop move, and it blew up in their fucking faces. And that's it. That's your finish. And it was great. What this War Games match did... the equivalent of that would be, try to imagine that same exact tag match, same length, and that tag match went pretty long too. It went about half an hour. And maybe it went a little too long, but I didn't feel it because I was enjoying it so much. So I thought it actually, they worked well within the time they were given. But try to imagine that same tag match, but they do the flippy flop fail spot at the 20-minute mark, and then the match continues for another 10 minutes. You blew your load. You ruined it. You peaked. That was your peak. That was your finish. It was right there. And then you continue for another 10 minutes, and you can't recapture the excitement that you had with that spot. And it was a missed opportunity, and then your match starts to drag because you already blew your really good finish. And what this match did, there was a part where the Undisputed Era, all 8 men are in the ring at this point. In the Undisputed Era, it's the 4 of them. They beat down everybody except Pat McAfee. And he stands up, and they're surrounding him, and they beat the ever-living shit out of him. And I'm thinking, all right, the heels have been slain. 4-on-1 beatdown on the motor mouth asshole heel, who's, by the way, Pat McAfee, really good. He's done a really good job, both in the ring and on the mic. He's probably the best guy in NXT right now. That's mean. But it's like, all right, this asshole's going to get the beatdown of a lifetime, and they're going to kick his ass, and then the Undisputed Era is going to stand tall. That when you get the asshole heel that you want to see get his ass kicked, alone with 4 guys waiting to kick his ass after, months of like running his mouth and getting away with, conspiring against the Undisputed Era and everything, it's like, there's your payoff right there. The heel gets his comeuppance in the biggest way imaginable. They do that spot, and then the match continues for another 10 minutes after that. And I was like, Jesus Christ. And then they get to a point where it's just Cole and McAfee, and Cole hits him with the Panama Sunrise. I'm like, okay, at least this will be the finish. And they have him kick out of it. And I'm like, oh my God in heaven. Oh my God. And then the finish, it was just Bobby Fish hitting like a top rope move that nobody cared about. I think it was like a knee drop off the top rope, but it didn't pay off the story at all. It didn't work. And it was kind of a flat finish. It's like they had their finish 10 minutes earlier. That was your finish right there. Just beat the shit out of Pat and go home, and you've got it. It's over. There are a couple other things. The tables with all the names of the Undisputed Era members on it. I don't think they put the right tables in the right spots because I think they wanted, maybe I'm wrong, but I think they wanted it to have like some kind of poetic meaning behind all the tables being put through. Like maybe they succeed in putting the Undisputed Era members through each of their own named tables. And then when it comes down to Cole puts Pat McAfee through the table, and so McAfee gets slammed through the Adam Cole table. They didn't accomplish any of that. They just kind of started randomly putting people through tables, and it was like, oh, that didn't work as well as I hoped it would. But the flow of it was better than the women's match. Made a little bit more sense. I could tell who was on what team, and I could follow the story a little bit better, and it didn't look quite as rehearsed. They threw a few weapons in there, and it was a little clunky to watch Pat McAfee, pile in 4 tables into the War Game structure, but generally a solid main event overall, but not enough to save what I felt was an overly long and overly bloated show that just didn't do a whole lot for me. So I gotta say, this is the worst NXT takeover ever, and it's kind of nice to know that they're mortal. Nice to know it's like we're gonna get a bad one of these at some point, right? So it took almost 7 years, but we finally got there. I'm not mad at it. It's just kind of like, man, NXT, and it didn't help that this past Wednesday went down the way that it did with the go home show, where NXT's doing these ladder matches to determine who gets the man advantage in the War Games matches, and nobody gave a shit because Sting showed up on AEW. So it's like, yeah, 2 random ladder matches. Yeah, I don't care. Sting, yeah. And I'll even say Impact kind of stole their thunder a little bit with the reveal that Kenny Omega was going to be appearing on the show. So those two shows look way more interesting right now than NXT. And all of this went down like right before War Games. So it's like, oh man. Ooh. So I'm already a little deflated going in because I'm just thinking to Tuesday. I want to get to Tuesday. That was all that was on my mind. And NXT almost felt like a distraction from that more than anything else. And I was hoping they could pull through and deliver a really good show, but ultimately it just didn't happen. I think the wrestlers worked really hard. I'm not going to question the effort at all. I mean, they busted their asses out there. It's just, I think, less than stellar creative, less than stellar booking, and maybe a little bit of self-indulgence. And that's a modern problem in wrestling where guys need to go like to 145% to try and steal the show every single night. And, the Hardy Boys were guilty of it. The Young Bucks are guilty of it. Lots of guys are guilty of it. And it's that mindset. We got to chase those star ratings and get Dave Meltzer to give us that stamp of approval. And it's like, no, you really don't. You really don't. You just got to have the match that makes the most sense for the story that you're trying to tell. That's it. To highlight my point, I remember watching Slammiversary 07. So this is an old TNA pay-per-view. Slammiversary 07, and that was the one that had the King of the Mountain match where Kurt Angle became the first TNA World Heavyweight Champion. It was Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe, Christian Cage, AJ Styles, and Chris Harris. It was Chris Harris, yeah. And everybody was talking about that King of the Mountain match and was very good. It was a spot festy car wreck kind of match, but a really exciting and well put together one. But then when you get into all right, what was the second best match on the show? And I said Eric Young and Bobby Roode because it paid off their storyline perfectly. And I read all the reviews the next day, and they gave that match 2 stars, 2.5, 2 stars. And it's a little bit too much comedy, and a little bit too much gaga and stuff like that. It's but everything they did impacted the story, and it gave you a payoff and a feel-good ending where Eric Young got out from under Bobby Roode's thumb. It worked beautifully. It was the exact thing it needed to be to pay off that story, and I thought that was my pick for the second best match on the show behind the King of the Mountain. But nobody agreed with me back then, and I don't know, maybe if that match were to happen today, maybe people would feel a little bit differently, because I've noticed the online discourse, a lot more people are realizing that this kind of Ring of Honor style, indie style mindset of approaching wrestling matches, because we're getting, it's one of those cases, be careful what you wish for, it might just come true, where it's more than ever before, we are getting longer and longer matches on TV and on pay-per-view more than ever before, and people aren't happy with it. It's because you're wearing them out. That's why. You can't expect people to have that kind of attention span for the entirety of a full pay-per-view and to sit through 30-minute matches and hour-long matches more than once on a show. It's just not feasible. And this pay-per-view, this event, it was only 3 hours long. It felt much longer than that. And food for thought. And back the old takeovers, which were great, you'd have matches that lasted a minute. I remember Bull Dempsey would just beat somebody in a minute. And it's oh, cool. And Baron Corbin, when he first showed up, he would beat a guy in 30 seconds. And then they would use the short matches to build to a Baron Corbin-Bull Dempsey match. It's simple, basic, old-school stuff. Well, that stuff makes sense. This stuff doesn't make sense. It's overindulgent and silly. And you're trying too hard. It's dude, just go back to basics. It works. It works for a reason. But anyway, that's my rant. NXT TakeOver War Games, not for me, not my cup of tea. But hey, they were bound to have a bad show at some point with these things. So it is what it is. So let's dive into other topics that I wanted to talk about. Okay, now that I've wrapped up with the NXT talk, it's time for me to talk about Kenny Omega's appearance on Impact Wrestling. And then once I've wrapped up that, then you get to see all the Starrcade stuff that I filmed. So okay, just to follow up on what I said on the previous segment, the Dallas Cowboys are not playing real well right now against the Ravens. It looks like the Ravens are going to win this game. So, Washington football team and New York Giants, they're the ones that are kind of going to be battling for the NFC East, it appears anyway. And Philly, they're just, their quarterback situation is a joke. But anyway, Kenny Omega on Impact Wrestling. Heavily publicized. Impact was definitely going to get a bump from this. I watched it on Twitch, and I believe they peaked at around 52,000 viewers, which typically they do between 3,000 and 4,000. That's my understanding. They're typically in that range. So huge bump from AEW this week in the heavily publicized Kenny Omega appearance. And I guess I'll just talk about the segment itself, where it was essentially just a promo with Don Callis explaining his history with Kenny Omega, and Omega pretty much lining up how he feels he's the best and how he is going to be, the all-time great world champion of AEW and everything. Major advancement as far as any kind of interpromotional work between Impact and AEW was only alluded to, with Kenny saying that he was going to be a belt collector, or alluding to him being a belt collector. He didn't elaborate beyond that, and then towards the end, Don said that they had an announcement that they were going to be making in Jacksonville on tomorrow night's Dynamite. So largely it was just a preview for tomorrow night's Dynamite is essentially what the segment was. Which is not a bad thing, because they've still got me hooked. I'm still intrigued by what's going on. But nothing major happened. There was no major bombshell drop, like Kenny Omega bought Impact Wrestling and now he's the owner, and now he's the champion of another organization and the executive producer of another organization, and now he's turned around and bought another company. Nothing crazy like that happened, but I guess we're going to have to wait for Dynamite tomorrow night to see the real crazy stuff, which a Dynamite that also has Sting's first interview since debuting with AEW, and his second appearance on Dynamite. So that'll all be very interesting. So they've got Dynamite. It's got me intrigued. So we'll see how it all plays out. So this whole segment, not a whole lot happened in terms of major developments, but it kept me intrigued, and I'm still interested in seeing where this all goes. So Dynamite tomorrow night is going to be very interesting, to say the least. Hello everyone, and welcome to my latest Starrcade related video, where I will be going over the very best and very worst matches in Starrcade history, determined by no one else but myself. And this is largely based on my recent experiences, because as I said in the previous Starrcade video, I went through the process of rewatching all of the Starrcades, all 18 events, and getting a fresh perspective on all the shows as they took place. And actually, it was that fresh perspective that heavily influenced the previous video, where I talked about is Starrcade a WrestleMania-style event? Because that really something I was thinking about while going back and watching all these shows and seeing how WCW's business model changed over the years, and how Starrcade kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. But I went through all the events, and I picked out the matches that I absolutely despised the most, and the matches that I absolutely adored, and were the ones that I consider to be classics in the annals of the history of the granddaddy of them all. So let's get the negative out of the way. Let's do the bad matches first. And first up, we have a match from 1997, not the one you're probably thinking of, although give it a minute. That would be Goldberg versus Steve Mongo McMichael. Now, on paper, I can understand the thought process here, where it's like, you've got this new guy in Goldberg, great look, seems to be catching on really quickly, and you want to give him his first significant win on what's sure to be WCW's biggest pay-per-view of all time. And putting him with Mongo, again, on paper, there's a method to the madness there, where they both have football backgrounds, and Mongo was, one of the Horsemen, and has some level of credibility based on the way he had been presented and booked. The problem is that Goldberg was still green as grass, and Mongo was never very good as a worker. So expecting Mongo to get a halfway decent match out of Goldberg was a distinct tactical error and a severe miscalculation on WCW's part. And it was a bad match that didn't do anybody involved any favors. It didn't hurt Goldberg in the long run. People didn't seem to care. I think in the end they got what they wanted out of it, which was a Goldberg victory over someone who was at least somewhat of a name. But it didn't elevate Goldberg either, the way that his first major pay-per-view match probably should have. And next up is from 1984's event. The second Starrcade yielded one of the top 5 worst matches, at least from my point of view, and that was for the United States Championship, as Wahoo McDaniel defended against the legendary superstar Billy Graham. It's amazing to see just how far Graham had fallen since his heyday. And granted, Graham was never the greatest worker in the world. He was the guy that sold himself on his character, and that was the major appeal of him when he had his big run in New York. But it was amazing just how much he had really fallen in such a short span of time, where here he's doing the karate gimmick, which I don't know how else to say this, didn't work for him. Didn't work for him at all whatsoever. And he's in there with Wahoo, who, I mean, he's not going to get a good match out of him. So what you got, it was a match that was clunky, terrible, and it had the feel of both a match involving people who had never been trained, which wasn't true given who was involved, and a match between two old-timers far past their prime, which that is certainly more the case. But the match was so sloppy and awkward and weird that it weirdly felt like both kinds of matches at the same time. It was very, very weird, and a horrible misuse of the secondary championship for the NWA at that point. On a big card like Starrcade, this just felt like a bad throwaway match. And next up from 1994, one of the more stellar Starrcade events, if there ever was one. 1994 was truly one for the ages. But the worst match on that card, it wasn't the main event. It was the special attraction match as Mr. T took on Kevin Sullivan. First of all, you'll notice from the wonderful picture that I have posted here that Mr. T looked like he was dressed as a referee. I don't know why that is. I mean, granted, he had been a special guest referee, making special appearances for WCW at this point. But it just felt weird to see one of the competitors come out dressed like a referee. Very odd aesthetic choice on his part. And unlike the first WrestleMania, going into the first WrestleMania, Mr. T was one of the biggest TV stars on the planet. Had the Rocky, had the appearance in the Rocky movie. He had the A-Team, and he was a legitimate big iconic star. By 1994, I don't think anybody really cared who Mr. T was anymore, so this was a bizarre cross-promotional deal on its face, and felt like a sad attempt at trying to recapture the magic of the glory days of the mid-'80s, which is something I guess you could say kind of plagued Hogan's early days in WCW, where it felt like they kept trying to repeat things that had worked years before, and it just didn't, and then they stumbled onto the NWO, and the rest is history, but this just felt like a really bad, pathetic attempt to try and really capture the magic of the early WrestleManias, specifically the first one, and it just did not work at all whatsoever. And of course, this match had to make the list. The main event to Starrcade 1997, Hollywood Hogan defending the WCW Championship against Sting. Now, this made the list purely for the fact that it was the greatest build-up of all time, and yet juxtaposed with probably the biggest disappointment in the history of wrestling pay-per-view. And people have talked about it for years and years and years, so I won't belabor the point, but this was so easy to book. They almost like, Conrad and Bischoff had covered the whole thing about the whole tanning thing and all that other stuff, and whether or not Sting was in shape or had his head in the game. I'm not going to get into that per se. What I will say is that if they wanted to be lazy, all they had to do was have Sting beat him in 30 seconds. And if you wanted to cover up for Sting maybe not being in the best shape, there were ways to do that other than what they did, which was a convoluted and confusing mess, where they even screwed up the whole crux of the entire thing, which was the fast count. The entire thing was just a mess and a major, major disappointment given all the promotion and all the buildup that had gone into this match and this event. It was huge. It was larger than life. It yielded some of the best wrestling television of all time. And then you get to the match and they completely dropped the ball. The only thing they did right is that Sting at least walked out with the belt, but they'd horribly mishandled it to such a degree that it's not a surprise to me that they tried to take two a couple months later at Super Brawl. It was an unfortunate mess and probably the biggest disappointment in the history of pro wrestling. And my pick for the worst match in Starrcade history is one that I was reminded of when I watched Starrcade 1999. And it's one that doesn't get talked about a lot as far as bad matches go, but on this last rewatch, it aggravated me to such a degree that when I was putting my list together of the worst matches in Starrcade history, this one immediately jumped out at me. So I was like, all right, I've got to pick it. Kevin Nash versus Sid Vicious in a powerbomb match. Now, you look at Kevin Nash and Sid, two stylistically similar guys. typically you expect those guys to have better matches with guys who are smaller than them who can bump for them. And those are typically the type of opponents they would get. So you're not expecting the greatest match in the world here, but with the stipulation in the gimmick, it's like, okay, one of these two biggies is going to get powerbombed. And it's kind of the same appeal of like an Andre Big John Studd, where you set up a heel, you've heard Andre with the whole haircut segment and everything, and you want to see Andre get his revenge. You put the money on the line so it feels like it has stakes, and then you go into that match, you just want to see Andre slam Studd, and the match delivered on that. So people have trashed that match over the years, saying, oh, it's not a good match, but it's like, dude, it delivered exactly what it needed to. It didn't overstay its welcome. It gave people what they wanted to see, and it delivered what I felt was the first true WrestleMania moment. So I give that match a lot of credit for accomplishing what it needed to accomplish. This match is like the bad version of Andre and Studd. Match was too long, the match was very clunky, and then when you get to the point where it's like, all right, one of these two big guys is going to get powerbombed, they do a screwjob finish where Nash knocked out Sid behind the referee's back with some fluky BS going on, because of course there was, because WCW, because NWO, you know, all that jazz. But the referee didn't see it, and when Sid was down, Nash told him, oh, I powerbombed him, and the referee called the match for Nash. And I'm like, wait, what? First of all, how can the referee call it if he didn't see it? Second of all, why would you advertise a powerbomb match with two big guys going to powerbomb each other and then not give the people the powerbomb? It was just a flippin' mess all around, and really spoke to the poor booking of WCW in its dying days. And 1999 was a really bad year for them all around. And a match like that was just indicative of the type of stuff you would expect to see in WCW during that point in time. And it's horrible, it's terrible, and it's really bad. So when I went back and rewatched all these Starrcades, there were plenty of matches that pissed me off, like the main event to Starrcade 84, Flair and Dusty. That match also pissed me off, but I gave it some slack because at least it set up a much better match at 85, so it's like I can understand the method to the madness. This, though, is just awful, just irredeemably awful, and I feel like it should be called out more as one of the worst matches of all time, and it's not one that typically comes up, but it really pissed me off when I watch it, so I picked that as the worst match in Starrcade history. And now that we got all the negative out of the way, it's time to talk about the positives. What are my top 10 favorite matches in Starrcade history? And I actually had a hard time narrowing the list down to 10. There were plenty of matches that I really enjoyed. And I'm going to go over the runner-ups first. These are the ones that didn't quite make the cut, but I did really enjoy. The Cruiserweight Ladder match from 2000, which was the last really good Starrcade match. From the final event, you got this kind of car wreck, spot festy type of match that was starting to become commonplace with the TLC matches going on in WWF, and then a match like this would follow suit. And they would obviously set the stage for things like Money in the Bank down the road. For better or worse, whether or not that's a good thing, I'll leave up to you. But for a promotion that had almost nothing going for it at this point in its dying days, having something like this, which was just a fun free-for-all car wreck, was at least exciting on a show that was on life support. You got the dual Cruiserweight title matches from 1998 with Billy Kidman having to defend the title twice. I thought that was a very exciting scenario, and it got to show off what Kidman was capable of during this stage of his career. From 1999, there was double duty from Jeff Jarrett as he worked both a bunkhouse match against Dustin Rhodes, but he also had an excellent ladder match with Chris Benoit, he who must not be named. This video might get pulled for me saying that name out loud, but great ladder match, and one that kind of happened the day of the show, because Benoit was stuck without an opponent, and Jarrett ended up playing double duty and did really well for himself on this night. So Jarrett deserves a lot of credit for that, and of course Benoit deserves a lot of credit for his in-ring work, if nothing else. Also on the list, the Road Warriors versus the Horsemen from 1987, which is in many ways kind of the ideal 1980s Crockett promotion tag team match. The two best tag teams. It was the Road Warriors, the cool badasses, and the Horsemen, who were the, Arn and Tully, the classic old school grapplers that would beat you down and could find a way to outsmart the Road Warriors and secure their titles. There was also the cage match from '86 with Arn and Ole, the not quite the Horsemen yet, but they went up against the Rock and Roll Express in a very good cage match from 1986. And again, speaks to the strength of the tag team division during that period. That I mean, both shows really, WWF and NWA, were just killing it with their tag divisions and featured some of the greatest tag teams of all time. And I think that is a great segue into my number 10 pick for my favorite matches in Starrcade history. There we go. Okay, from 1988, we got this display of tag team excellence, old school tag team goodness, as Jim Cornette's Midnight Express took on Paul E. Dangerously's original Midnight Express. This happened at the 88 edition of Starrcade and featured all the excellent tag team action that you would expect out of a Midnight Express match, with the added fun of the managers going at it. And, you know, you look at Paul Heyman, you look at Jim Cornette, you get two of the greatest managers to ever play the role. So to have them going at each other and sniping at each other and attacking each other, and Cornette going after him and Heyman running away and all that other stuff, that added an extra layer of fun and excitement to the match. Yeah, I think it made it better. And this is a match that you could argue didn't really need that gaga because of who was in the ring and the whole situation with who's the true Midnight Express and all that stuff. But I thought the managers added a lot of flavor to a match that would have been exciting anyway. It would have been exciting anyway, and they just added a lot of flavor to it. And it made sense given the build-up and the storyline that they had between everybody involved. I thought it was very, very good stuff, and I really enjoyed it. But the tag teams were on full display in Starrcade 1988 because the Midnight Express match wasn't even my favorite tag match on the show. That honor would go to the NWA Tag Team title match as the Road Warriors, the heel Road Warriors, fresh off of the infamous Spike incident with Dusty Rhodes, defending their NWA Tag Team championships against the very charismatic and exciting babyface tag team of the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and the man called Sting. Does it get any more classic NWA than this? I mean, you got Dusty Rhodes, you got the Road Warriors, and you got Sting, who at this point was a fresh up-and-coming guy, all going at it. Very colorful characters on display, great build-up heading into this thing, and the end result was a very, very, very exciting tag team match that captured all the excitement of this era and was the type of stuff you would expect to see out of a tag team match from Jim Crockett promotion from this era, especially when the Road Warriors are involved. You expect a fight, you get a fight. You get good, down and dirty brawling between four very exciting characters, and it was a very colorful and exciting match. Would have liked the finish to be better, but the overall match was so exciting I couldn't drop it down that much, and it made number 9 on my list. Next up is from 1985, and the first main event, the first of a few main events that made my list of top 10 favorite matches. And again, you want to talk about star power here. Ric Flair versus Dusty Rhodes. Is there anything that's more classic NWA than that? I mean, you want a main event during the mid-'80s. Flair and Dusty, I mean, that's as classic wrestling as you could possibly get. These two had main evented Starrcade 84, which had been set up in 83, with Dusty Rhodes challenging the winner to Flair and Harley Race. The 84 match didn't go very well, had a very weak finish, and the match itself was kind of flimsy. But I felt like they came back in spades here and had a very exciting match. A worthy main event on a show that was loaded with gimmicks and all sorts of things. And 85 is going to come up again later in this list, but I thought Flair and Dusty had a very, very good match that was worthy of being the main event, and a match that was worthy of the star power of those involved, which is something that the 84 match didn't quite have. That felt like kind of a throwaway main event. This felt like a true, like, okay, the world title's on the line, everything's on the line, everything goes, and it's two exciting characters, two exciting stars, with a clear-cut heel and a clear-cut face, and they're going at it in the grand stage of a Starrcade main event, and in the end of the day, we got a title change out of it, which made it even better. And at number 7, we go into the Monday Night Wars period, 1996, where the NWO was in full swing. Main event of the show was Hollywood Hogan versus Roddy Piper in a non-title match, and it resulted in, at the time, the biggest buy rate in WCW history, but I'm not going to be talking about that match. Number 7 on my list goes to the Cruiserweights, the opening bout. Dean Malenko defending the WCW Cruiserweight Championship against the J Crown title holder, the Ultimo Dragon, with all 8 of his belts on the line. So this is, part of Ultimo Dragon being the belt collector and all of that. And I don't think, does that break some kind of a record or something, like 9 belts on the line at once? Is that like the all-time record? I don't know. I'm sure people more knowledgeable than me probably have the definitive answer on that. But whether it be 9 belts, 2 belts, 1 belt, whatever, the stakes felt big for a cruiserweight match. And the end result was a wonderful clash of styles between 2 guys that could get it done in the ring. I think Dean Malenko was kind of the standard bearer. He was the backbone of the cruiserweight division. Guys like Rey Mysterio gave it the flash. Guys like Juventud Guerrera gave it a lot of flash and color. Psychosis, Ultimo Dragon, obviously. And then you got Chris Jericho, who brought a lot of character and pizzazz to the division when it hadn't quite been there initially. But Dean Malenko was that steady hand, that guy that could get a good match out of anybody and could make anybody look good and could elevate any situation that he was a part of involving the cruiserweights. And this was a perfect example of that, where you had this big unification match. It was built up to Starrcade, and the end result was Ultimo Dragon winning all the belts. But really the end result was probably my pick for the best cruiserweight match in Starrcade history. I thought it was great. Yeah, we've got more tag teams here at number 6. I mean, I like tag teams. Don't you like tag teams? Tag teams are great. And we get my pick for the best tag team match in Starrcade history. It happened in 1992. Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas facing Barry Windham and Brian Pillman for the unified WCW NWA Tag Team Championship. I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this except go watch it. If you love tag team wrestling, go watch this. It was great. It's stellar. It's up there for me as one of the best tag team matches I've ever seen. I absolutely adore this. I love all the guys involved. I think all of them have brought something to the table throughout the history of pro wrestling and proven themselves to be excellent workers when the spotlight shined on them. None more so than Ricky Steamboat, who's in my top 5 of all time. I could watch Ricky do just about anything. And this was a perfect example of just, you stick him. You wouldn't think sticking him with the, at the time, unproven Shane Douglas would yield much results, but it did, big time. I thought they worked out great as a tag team, and I thought this match was great. I loved every second of it. And it was one of the major highlights of the 1992 Starrcade event. And now we've got another main event for Starrcade, this time from 1993, one of the biggest main events in Starrcade history, with the title versus career stipulation. Big Van Vader defending the WCW Championship against Ric Flair, who returned to WCW earlier that year. And this was kind of the culmination of his comeback tour. And it's really funny. You look at this match, title versus career. It seems like such a natural thing to do. It wasn't even in their first plan. Their first plan was Vader versus Sid. But then things happened with Sid, shall we say. And we ended up getting this match, which I think most people would agree was much better. And Flair and Vader, it's a pairing you don't hear about that often, or you wouldn't think about doing, because they're so opposite of each other stylistically that it almost feels like it wouldn't work. Vader works best, like most big guys, he works best when he's in there with someone who can really, play the babyface in distress, and someone like Sting. Sting was perfect for him. And Flair is one of those guys, I think, has that classical style that just works better as a heel. So on paper, it's like, man, are these two going to work? And man, it worked. I thought it worked beautifully, and I think the story they had going into this with Flair putting his career on the line, on the 10th anniversary of his first Starrcade win over Harley Race, who was Vader's manager at the time. A lot of overlapping stories going on there. And I think it painted a very nice picture by the time it was done. It was an excellent, excellent main event match, and one that is definitely worth watching. My only knock, the finish is a little weak, but everything else is so good, I can't fault it that much. It is my pick for the 5th best match in Starrcade history, but it's not the best main event in Starrcade history. We'll get to that later. And it's also not Vader's best match in Starrcade history. We're going to get to that next. Another match from Starrcade 1992, we had Sting versus Big Van Vader in the finals of the King of Cable tournament. Now, I've put over the Sting Vader matches so many times on this channel, it almost feels like I'm repeating myself, but I love the Sting Vader matches. Their match at the Great American Bash, I love that match. Their strap match at Super Brawl, awesome match. Sting and Vader, they never had a bad match whenever they worked with each other. Now, if you were to ask me, I would say that this match, the Starrcade match, is probably their least significant of the pay-per-view matches. There wasn't a world title on the line. The King of Cable tournament itself was kind of a weird concept that just kind of felt like something that they threw together that didn't have a whole lot of meaning behind it, but it turned out to be an excuse to do a Sting Vader match and give Sting that win back after losing the world title to Vader at Great American Bash earlier that year. And then setting the stage for their eventual strap match a couple months later. So it was a very valuable match for all of the reasons I just stated, but if you had asked me, it's probably on the lower end of the Sting Vader scale, and it's still awesome. It's the fourth best match in Starrcade history. I absolutely adore this match, as I do most Sting Vader matches, and if you have not seen the Sting Vader matches, go to the WWE Network and go check them out. They are great, and I love them. And this match is no exception. 1992, not a great year for WCW in terms of the way Bill Watts was running things, and the production was weak, and there had various other problems going for it. And this show had problems going against it, mainly dedicating themselves to the Battle Bowl concept, which felt like random gimmicks being thrown out there. But we did get a great tag match out of it, and we got this amazing match between Sting and Vader. So, even in 1992, they had their problems, but man, they also had some really good matches, and this is one of them. Next up, we have the original Starrcade grudge match, blood feud gimmick match. That is Roddy Piper versus Greg Valentine in the dog collar match, a match that has gone down as legendary, arguably the most significant match of both men's careers. Well, Roddy had some bigger matches. Bigger main events like his stuff with Hogan in both WWF and WCW. But in terms of like the impact it had on the business and how influential this match was, because this really set the stage for the type of blood and guts wrestling that you would see in Crockett throughout the 1980s, and you would see show up in the 1990s in various other promotions like ECW and WWF and WCW and everything else. So it was a match that was a huge trendsetter and a huge influence on the boys, and you could definitely see this match's fingerprints on a lot of those down and dirty, no holds barred type of matches. It's a brutal match to watch. They beat the ever-living dog crap out of each other. But it was also very entertaining, and if you can believably portray that you're really beating the shit out of each other and make it feel like a down and dirty fight, that gets me hooked, and this match absolutely has me hooked whenever I watch it. I really did believe that these guys hated each other, and they wanted to beat the shit out of each other, and they were tied to each other with a chain and had all the opportunity in the world to do that. So hats off to both men, both Hall of Famers, both legends. This match is excellent and one of the very best that Starrcade has to offer, and in my opinion, the best match of the original Starrcade event. And for me, even with Flair's title win in the main event, I think the dog collar match is the main reason to check out the first Starrcade. And next up at number 2 is my pick for the best main event in Starrcade history. Ric Flair defending the NWA World Championship against Lex Luger, the total package. This match is great. And, Starrcade 88, I put the 2 tag matches on there, but this match beat even both of those. This is an excellent, high-caliber main event, and I think it's Ric Flair's very best Starrcade match, which is saying, he was like the guy for Starrcade. And I think this is his personal best match, and that says a lot when you look at some of the other matches I picked for this list. I think one of the reasons this match worked for me, not only did it have all the blood and guts and big-time main event feel that you would expect out of a Crockett Promotions NWA-style main event match, it also is kind of weirdly a window into what would have happened if we got Hogan versus Flair in '88 instead of getting it in 91 when both of them were kind of, or 91, 92, and 94, and then again in 99 when they were pretty much past their prime, and the intrigue of the match wasn't quite as strong as it would have been in the late 80s. To me, this match represents what the Hogan-Flair match, with both men at their peak, both men at their best, would have been like. It would have been something like this. Again, my imagination likes to think it would have been something like that, but you got Lex Luger, who's an amazing body, big powerhouse guy, going up there against the classic heel champion in Ric Flair, and they had a very natural chemistry with each other. I thought they worked very well with each other, and Lex Luger's a guy I've often defended on here, where it's like he gets labeled as a bad worker and not a good wrestler and overpushed and all this other stuff, and I'm like, Lex Luger definitely had his moments. Case in point right here, my pick for second best match in Starrcade history was when he main evented with Ric Flair and had a barn burner of a match that easily ranks up there as my personal favorite main event in the show's history. And I think that, Luger, for all the negativity one could throw his way, he definitely had his moments, and this was one of them. This was, and yes, I know he's working with Ric Flair, but keep in mind, Ric Flair also worked Starrcade main events with Nikita Koloff and Ronnie Garvin, who you could even argue, like, Ronnie Garvin's probably a better worker than Luger, but the intrigue wasn't there. I mean, that Koloff match, I couldn't be bothered to give a shit. It's like, who cares? Like, who the hell cares about that match? Ronnie Garvin versus Flair, it's like, who cares? Like, that's Ronnie's not a main event player. He's just not. He never had that appeal to him. Luger did, and I think that made the match more exciting, and Flair was able to get the very absolute best out of him, and I think it was a testament to both men's abilities, personally. And like I said, it's the best main event in Starrcade history in my eyes. Now, I talked about it with the dog collar match. The NWA would have their blood and guts, violent, brawling, grudge matches to settle feuds. And maybe they did those a little bit too much. There are some cards out there where they have like 4 or 5 gimmick matches in a row. Starrcade 85 being one of them, which was a heavily over gimmick show. But when you got the build-up and you got the talents in the right place, and you have those gimmicks involved, it can be absolute magic. And this is one of those cases where we get the payoff to Tully Blanchard's feud with Magnum TA over the U.S. title, and they settled it in a steel cage I Quit match. Not a whole lot of flashy moves here. It's just two guys in a bloodbath beating the shit out of each other, and I loved every second of it. I remember the first time I watched that match, I was like, that's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And again, they didn't do that much except beat the shit out of each other, and it was believable, and it was real, and it was raw. And it sucks me in every single time I watch it. So when I was putting this list together, again, I rewatched every Starrcade in preparation for this, but I put Blanchard and Magnum TA number 1 on the list even before watching any of the Starrcades, because I knew it was going to be my favorite. I just knew it was. And that didn't change throughout the course of watching all 18 Starrcades again. It's like, yep, this is the best match in Starrcade history, so thumbs up to Blanchard and Magnum TA. And they're guys that, they don't get the love that like a Dusty Rhodes would, or a Ric Flair would, or a Sting, or the Road Warriors, or Roddy Piper, or those type of guys. They don't get that level of recognition or love all the time, and this was over a mid-card championship, but they went out there and absolutely tore it down and stole the show, and delivered what I feel is the very best match in Starrcade history. So major credit to both men for that. It's an absolutely excellent match, and if you have not seen it, again, go to the WWE Network. Go check it out. I don't think you'll be disappointed. So that concludes my latest Starrcade video, the worst matches and my picks for the best matches. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. I've really enjoyed diving into the old Starrcades and talking about them and picking out my favorites and least favorite parts of the Starrcades. And we're done talking about the matches. The next video I do on Starrcade is going to be about ranking them. I'm going to rank all 18 Starrcade events from worst to best and give details on each one along the way to explain my case and explain why I feel the way I do about those particular events. So, That concludes this video. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will be back later with more Starrcade related videos as we close out in December and we wrap up this awful year of 2020. But that's it. I'm done here, and I'll see you all later.